When I started thinking about what to say to you this morning, I realised with a shock that the last time I spoke at St Catherine's was back on the 2nd of February, which was Candlemas. On that morning, in the grey half-light of a February morning, we lit candles to remember the Christ light in our lives, and how little we knew then how much we were going to need that light in our lives in the months that were to follow. So where are we now? This morning's short reading from Romans chapter 5 is packed with dense theology. I could spend half an hour on the first verse alone, but I would like to be of some practical help, so I want to look at just 4 words. Those words are suffering, endurance, character, and hope. What they meant in the context of Paul's time and what they may have to say to us today. Suffering, endurance, character, and hope. And hope is the key. It makes sense of all the other words. It is the red badge of courage, the passport into life of the Christian. It shapes the way you see your life. The further you go on your Christian journey, the more hope shapes everything you do. But let's begin with suffering, because we must. In Paul's day, suffering was part of the deal. To be a Christian meant facing discrimination, persecution, possible death at the hands of outraged fellow citizens who thought your cult a pernicious weirdness. In the saying, he boasts of his suffering, I think Paul is being ironic, or at best paradoxical. It's a piece with the foolishness of the cross in the first letter to the Corinthians. And unfortunately, down the centuries, it's sometimes come to be taken literally, with people believing all sorts of trials, physical and spiritual, are purposely sent by God to test them. I do not for a minute believe that the God of love willingly inflicts physical suffering on anyone. Why he allows a virus to spread around the world is something I can't explain. It's part and parcel with the great question of why evil exists in our world at all, and not something we have time to dwell on this morning. This morning, in the present moment, what does the word suffering mean to you? If we are to move forward in hope, I think it helps to name your pain. Be honest about it. I know a lot of us are putting a brave face on at the moment, saying we know that others have it much worse than we do, we can't complain and so on. And while this is true, it's also true to say that there is much about life that hurts right now. The sorrow of losing friends, the separation from friends and family, the money worries, the sheer unpredictability. Some days it seems unbearable. This brings me to the second word, endurance. In modern English, it largely has a passive sense, holding out because there's nothing for it but to grit your teeth, wait for trouble to pass, grinning and bearing. The Greek word that Paul used, hupomone, has a much more active sense. It means having a spirit in you that is looking for ways to overcome, to make the best of the situation you find yourself in. Perhaps fortitude would be a better word. Does that not make better sense of your life right now? How to live as a Christian in our changed circumstances? You need fortitude. Head up, bright-eyed, determination, perseverance, a refusal to let fear rule your life. In an ordeal like the current pandemic, nobody wants to merely endure. Sitting on the sofa watching Netflix only works for a week or 2. People desperately need to feel of use. It's no surprise that hundreds of thousands of us have volunteered to help the NHS and the charity sector at this time. And for Christians whose faith is largely worked out in doing rather than being, it has been hard indeed to remain passive, unable to go about visiting and running support groups and all the countless other social activities that have filled so many hours of our lives. We've all had to do quite a bit of self-assessment. What does it mean to be a Christian at this time? How do we make Christ known when we can't meet together to celebrate communion? Our faith is principally about relationship, and here we are, isolated and alone. Alone in the everyday sense, but of course still in company with the God who never leaves us. And this is where character comes in. Character is another word that has shifted meaning slightly in recent times. 100 years ago, it was a very serious word that described a personal reputation. These days, you're more likely to hear it stated in with slight irony. Oh, he's a bit of a character, you know. It's a lazy way of saying that somebody is, possibly on the elderly side, somebody is a little eccentric, cantankerous, or just plain odd. Paul's Greek word, dokime, has been translated as character for us, but it has nothing to do with eccentricity or even reputation. It's a word originally used of metal that had been purged of impurities by fire. Looking back through your life, can you see how your own personality has been forged in the fire of events? The circumstances that have made you what you are today. One of the very few benefits of this great national pause in the general headlong rush of our distraction is the time it has given us all for reflection. This at least is a real gift for the Christian life, one we should be foolish to ignore. Time for reflection, time for prayer, time to draw nearer to God, to sense with new intensity the love poured into your heart. Truly, this is the wonderful grace in which we stand. We get to share in the glory of God now in our earthly lives. This is what makes faith real. It's not just a set of stories from history that we read about in our Bibles. It's a lived experience happening now this minute. So how can you fear what may happen to you after death? We have hope. We have hope in our eternal and glorious life to come. Another thing, as so often happens before in human history, times of national emergency bring demand for social change. I believe that God is active in the world right now, right this minute, bringing hope of real improvements, justice and equality to people who've had very little to live for. If you want to see an inspiring sermon on this topic, look on the internet for the funeral address for George Floyd given by the Reverend Al Sharpton in Minneapolis. He said he feels more hope now than at any time in the past. And for why? Because white Americans are marching too, all across the country, from the states like New Hampshire, where the population is 95% white. Large numbers are gathering to demand racial justice. People who've never been on a demonstration in their lives have been moved to take to the streets. As we look on with a mixture of hope and anxiety for the people of America, we naturally look to our own country, see the marchers, see their desire for change. Beyond the immediate Black Lives Matter cause, there is a deeper hunger for change. What will be the result? Will we look back on June 2020 as the month when a new era began? Or will it be business as usual by this time next year? By then, will we have put this period behind us and be maybe planning our next holiday as if nothing had happened? Or will we still be looking forward in hope? Hope for a better, fairer, more compassionate society, where the low-paid are esteemed, where our police force works in collaboration with ethnic minorities, where the elderly and the vulnerable are properly protected. So are you hopeful this morning? Of suffering, endurance and character we have certainly seen plenty this year. My prayer for you is that your hope remains undimmed, shining quietly inside you like the Candlemas candle, the witness of God's eternal presence and his steadfast love for us all. Amen.